Welcome to Deckbuilding Tutor, where we analyze a commander and find the best cards for it. My name is Nick, and I'm your guide for today. This tutorial is about the Necrobloom from Modern Horizons 3. This booger-looking plant creates tokens like it's playing the 2009 hit video game Plants vs. Zombies. Yes, someone is holding me at gunpoint to make that joke. Swarm your enemies to death just by playing lands and ramping. This is Tatyova, if Tatyova had access to the T-virus in Resident Evil. The Necrobloom is a 4-mana value spell that has Landfall. Whenever you play a land, create a 0-1 plant token or a 2-2 zombie token if you control 7 or more lands with different names. This card is basically just Field of the Dead in the command zone. It also gives lands in your graveyard Dredge 2. Dredge is useful in many ways, usually when we don't have a land drop in hand and we need to trigger our landfall effects. This deck's game plan is pretty straightforward. Just ramp on turn 2 to get Necrobloom out as soon as possible, generate tokens with landfall, find ways to have 7 lands with different names to unlock the 2-2 zombies, then just go wide and swing. We can also do some shenanigans with lands that have cycling, choosing whether to draw a card or to dredge 2 and get back the same land to our hand. We can win through combat, mass reanimating with Eerie Ultimatum, or create infinite tokens. Any of our landfall cards that create a token can combo with Kodama of the East Tree and a bounce land. Here are the steps to do this combo. Deckbuilding Tutor, this is too fucking long. I don't wanna read all this shit. Say less, homie, I got you. I'll summarize it. Basically, when you play the bounce land, that will trigger the Necrobloom and Kodama. Bounce the land back to your hand, create a token with Necrobloom, trigger Kodama again, then put the land back to field with Kodama's ability. Do that a trillion times until your opponents are scooping their decks. Now, you might figure out that we still can't win at that turn because the tokens don't have haste. And you are right about that. So, what we need to do is to do this combo at instant speed. We have Knight of the Reliquary, White of the Reliquary, and Crop Rotation to tutor a bounce land from our deck at instant speed. We do this at the end step of the previous players, so the tokens we create can attack immediately on our turn. Or we can just play Crashing Drawbridge that gives creatures haste. If you don't like infinite combos, we can simply win by using overrun effects. Here are your options. You can use whichever you like, but I would say Rumbleweed fits the lands theme the most. You can also win by just making your creatures unblockable with Odric, Master Tactician, or Champion of Lamphold. I think that Odric is really underrated. I get that you have to attack with it, with 3 other creatures, but you can even use this to force creatures to block. Since we will usually have a lot of tokens, we can easily go wide for Odric's ability. Champion of Lamphold can make our creatures unblockable as it gains enough +1/+1 counters. In the scenario that we cannot swing at all, like when we're against Pillowfort Cowards, creatures that drain our opponent's HP are really useful. Corpse Knight, Kambal, and Markud Bats all make opponents lose HP when we create tokens. Shepherd of Rot can tap to kill all players in the table, including us, when we have raised an army of zombies. Now that's one way to end the game. Alright, we have talked about our Wincons. What are the best landfall cards for this deck? Here are the landfall cards that create creature tokens. Now, we don't really need all of this in the deck since we already have Necrobloom for generating creatures. However, we still need 7 lands with different names to get 2-2 zombies. In the unlikely scenario that we don't fulfill that requirement, these cards will be really useful. Don't get Green Sieves though. I think it's overpriced at the moment because WotC refuses to reprint it. The best landfall card here is probably Scoot Swarm. When we reach 6 or more lands, Scoot Swarm makes copies of itself. So whenever we play a land, the number of Scoot Swarms we will have grows exponentially. Another strong landfall card here is Emeria Angel. It makes 1/1 flying creatures that we can use to attack easily or block flying creatures. Maha, Felidar Retreat, and Retreat to Umeria are landfall cards that also buff our creatures. Being an enchantment makes it harder to remove. We also have other landfall cards that can generate other types of tokens. Tireless Provisioner makes Treasure or Food, Tireless Tracker makes clues, and Springheart Nantuko can make token copies of the enchanted creature. We have other cards with landfall synergies. Nissa Vital Force can get us an emblem that will draw us a card when a land enters the battlefield. We can immediately get that emblem the next turn after we play Nissa. This is virtually a Tatyova card that permanently stays on the battlefield. Nissa of Shadowed Bows gets a counter when a land appears. We can immediately use her ult to reanimate a card from our graveyard or cheat a card from our hand. Lotus Cobra is a ramp card that gains us 1 mana of any color when a land enters the battlefield. If we play this on turn 2, we can play a land on turn 3 and have 4 mana to play Necrobloom. Avenger of Zendikar has an ETB that creates plant tokens, and when a land enters the battlefield, we buff our plants. Funnily enough, if we don't have 7 lands with different names by that point, and we play this card, Avenger of Zendikar can buff the plant tokens that Necrobloom creates. Alright, we've learned about the landfall cards we can play. What are the best lands we can put in the deck? To trigger our landfall cards twice per turn, we can play lands that sacrifice and gets another land into play. This effectively doubles our landfall triggers. Deceptive Landscape, Escape Tunnel, Terramorphic Expanse, and Evolving Wilds all accomplish this effect. We can also dredge these cards back to our hand with Necrobloom's ability. We have lands that have pay 1 and tap, fetch a basic land. We have Promising Vein, Shire Terrace, and Panorama cards. These cards are useful because they don't enter tapped, so we can use them immediately. When we need to trigger landfall, we just pay 1 and get a basic land. If you are drowning in too much money, you can burn it all away by using actual fetch lands that gets a land immediately to play untapped. These are more or less around $20 each, so if you want to slap all the other players with your money, you can use these cards. We have our landfall cards. We have the best lands that sacrifice themselves to trigger landfall. In the scenario that we want to draw and not dredge a land, cards that can play or reanimate lands from the graveyard helps us keep drawing into gas. We have Ramanop Excavator, Conduit of Worlds, Perennial Behemoth, and Ancient Green Warden, which can all play lands from the graveyard. Conduit of Worlds can even play permanents from our graveyard that we have milled with Dredge. Ancient Green Warden is the best one because it doubles our landfall triggers. World Shaper helps more with our mill strategy and can mass reanimate our lands to the field. Erinis can get us an additional land when it attacks. Undergrowth Recon just returns a land directly to the battlefield on our upkeep. And Sun Titan can reanimate a permanent with 3 mana value or less from our graveyard. This can get lands or other cards that have incidentally been milled. Of course, we need 10 sources of card advantage, so we always have gas. Most of these have landfall or token synergies. Braid's Arisen Nightmare, Thalia and Gitrog, and the Gitrog monster Ravenous Ride can all sacrifice tokens so we can draw. The Gitrog can even put a land card directly to the battlefield. If you want to, you can even make Thalia and the Gitrog monster as the commander of this deck. It has a similar gameplay to Necrobloom. Corrupted Conviction and Village Rites can draw us 2 cards when we sacrifice a token for just 1 mana, and even at instant speed. Nissa Vital Force, Welcoming Vampire, and Tokashia's Welcome all draw us a card when we trigger a landfall card or create a token. Finally, Painful Truths draw us 3 cards when we use 3 different colors, and Siphon Mine makes each player discard a card and you draw a card for each card discarded this way. Some people say Painful Truths is bad, but it's 3 mana for 3 cards. That's still good value. Siphon Mind can draw us a lot of cards for 4 mana, and we can just discard the land card from our hand that we can dredge. Since we are racing such a big army of zombies, Humans would generally tend to get scared of our swarm. They might drop a nuke in our lands in futile desperation, thinking they're the USA dropping bombs on Hiroshima. To counteract this, we can use cards that can make all of our creatures indestructible. Unlike instant spells where we have to leave mana open, these can just stay on the battlefield as a warning to all opponents. For ramp spells, we have the usual 2 mana ramp spells. Next, we have Ramp that gets us 2 lands to play. Harrow is technically a 1 mana ramp card that gets 2 lands, and Entish Restoration can get us up to 3 lands. For removal, we have the usual 3 mana spells that can target most permanents, and Damn if we need to board wipe. This deck needs a good amount of landfall cards. I put 14 in the list because we always have access to our commander. If you feel like you need to increase this landfall count, I have included more landfall cards in the maybe board. We have 3 instant speed tutors for our bounce land combo, 7 other token generators apart from Necrobloom so we can create a bigger army, 3 reanimation cards in case we mill any important cards, 3 anti-wrath cards so we protect our army, 10 sources of card draw, 10 ramp spells that can get up to 2 lands, and 8 removal spells so we can interact often with the board. That's all for this deck building tutorial. The Necrobloom has been a straightforward commander to build, since Landfall has already a lot of support. It's mostly just optimizing which cards belong to the final deck. I hope you learned a lot from this tutorial and explore more ways to build it. There are many ways to approach this deck, so I hope you find what's fun and what works best for you. This has been Deckbuilding Tutor. Thanks for watching my video. If you want to support me and this channel, please consider to like, comment, share, and subscribe.